Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to Space at the Center. You are here with Dr. Leah Barlow and Dr. Norrell Edwards. We are talking tonight a little bit about an extension of a conversation that we had earlier, but Norrell wrote this excellent article that will be linked below that I think everyone should read to kind of think through what actually happens with grant funding, what professors actually do with it. I think that conversation often gets lost. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Library of Congress and what's happening there. So, Narelle, can you talk to us about the article, what made you write the article, all of that good stuff?
Sure. So the article, Save the NEH, that I published with LA Review of Books, I actually got started on it. I must have found out that our grant was terminated on like a Wednesday, and I wrote the article that next weekend. It came out a month later just because I tried to place it at different places, feedback from editors, that kind of stuff. It took a while to actually get it published. Relatively, a month isn't actually that long, but I wrote it immediately because I wanted people to know, right, that like, this isn't just sort of like this obscure. I also think too, people have this assumption sometimes too that grants are just helping academics write their obscure research topics or on books, which some grants do that, and that is also important for new knowledge, but that is not all that it does, right? The grant that I lost was going towards, making a new class that was not only just for the students at my college, but was accessible to the public, that would pay guest speakers from publishing to come into the class, talk about kind of like their different various roles, help us understand, right, like what does the humanities ecosystem actually look like in praxis, right? So often we hear and have been hearing for years, what are you going to do with this humanities degree? This doesn't really do anything. This isn't really important, which is so false, right? There's so much storytelling happening in media, in books, in movies, all of those things. And certainly publishing is a huge bedrock of that. And so I had this idea, right, to create this new class that would kind of, you know, share this knowledge about publishing that's often gatekept, right? An industry that feels very like who's who, a little bit like entertainment, right? You got to know somebody to really get in to understand, etc. To my students who, again, I'm not an Ivy League institution, not an elite institution, not in a big major city where it's normal for students to have access to those kinds of networks, and also to fund internships, right? We met because we had the opportunity to do a summer research program at Princeton that allowed us to do research and also paid us. And so I'm very much aware how important it is, right, for you as a student to get real skills for your future career and get paid for them. Especially in this kind of economy, a lot of students need to work. And so if you could actually get an internship that pays, I mean, that can just set you so far ahead, right? And so my grant was terminated right around the beginning of April, right as we were revving up for internships. And I'm like, oh no, this is $15,000 that was going to go directly to students working, with partner organizations. And now this money is gone. And thankfully my college has since agreed to put up that money. But what if they didn't have the money? Those students would be, SOL, right? Not to mention, many of them signed up for this class thinking, oh, this is an opportunity. I'm not going to take this, or I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to plan this for the summer. I'm focused on taking this class where I have the potential to get this internship. And now, what, a month before they've already started applying, what, maybe like a month or so before summer is about to come, just have it cut. I mean, that's so disruptive. And so this administration has been incredibly disruptive, right, to so much of our landscape. And I think people don't fully even understand the ways that grants support so many organizations doing useful, helpful, necessary programming, right? Not just, again, research or feel things that feel obscure, but public work that helps people, right? So the article kind of gets into that and other aspects of funding that's been cut that, again, right, is supporting, community organizations, programming for librarians, professional development. You know how many students I have tell me, wow, how come I didn't learn this? Well, now you're not going to learn this because your high school teacher is not going to get a chance to go to a summer institute with a scholar who's specializing in the history of slavery. Now you're not going to learn that in high school because those opportunities have been cut.
Yeah, I think thank you for all of that. I think that it's important to note. I'm going to go backwards with what you said. So you talked about high school. I taught high school before, and that was a really big thing was us being able to do these summer opportunities. And a lot of times we were supported in those. And so when I saw that those were a part of what was being cut, I couldn't help but to think about all of the ways that, it's already a very small group of high school teachers that get the support to go to these types of programs. We happen to be in the Raleigh, Durham area, so everything was right there. But there's already a small number. And now with it completely being eliminated, at least for now, what does that look like for the students who don't have access to that information? Of course, adults can always try to get more, but teachers are already being overworked. And so now you add this kind of way that there are no sort of support for that. It looks like something that just won't happen in the future, which is what the goal I'm sure was anyway. The other thing you mentioned though was about us meeting at a program. And I think, both of us have experience with Mellon, have some experience around McNair, not me, but I think you do, right? All of these kinds of programs, Leadership Alliance, which is where we met, all of these kinds of programs are really helping to professionalize undergraduate students who otherwise would not have access to the very gate kept, to your point, information that is not readily available, not readily Googleable. I tried to Google how to get a PhD, and none of the information to me was what it needed to be if you're trying to go straight from undergrad into that process. So a lot of these programs are doing that work and providing the economic support so that you can think and you're not trying to work to support your apartment and your light stand on or your meal plan, whatever it may be, but you have some money kind of that's supporting that and helping you to professionalize at the same time. So I thought the article was great around getting people to kind of better hopefully understand what this means and sort of the everyday and details. And like I said, we'll leave a link to it below. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
I'll also say, this is incredibly frustrating, not just because I tried to also just think about like zooming out, right? Because of what's happening with this cut to funding, right? PhD programs are rescinding offers, PhD programs are shrinking. And so, we sort of finished undergrad and continued in academia also because it was hard to get a job, right?
Yeah.
Now it's going to be hard to get a job, but now it's also going to be hard to even get into a funded doctoral program or even maybe a funded master's programs because all of these schools, right, are going to be they're not going to have funding for those things. And so I realized too that a lot of people don't really understand what grants are. And so that's part of why I think that this is important and necessary to have a better understanding. I think I've seen some comments right on Facebook about, well, why are we giving 50 billion or however much 50 million to Harvard and all these Ivy League schools? They're thinking, oh, they're just going to do whatever with it. So many grants, especially federally funded grants, are earmarked for specific things, right? This isn't just money that just gets dumped into Harvard's bank account, right? And it also isn't money that is just sort of like, default given to them. The scholars, the professors, the sometimes staff who apply for these grants, they apply. They make proposals, right? They say what they're going to do that will specifically align with whatever the grant is requiring. And then the government makes them sign a contract that they are going to use the funds to do what they said that they would, right? In particular, I think a big selling point for my project, I applied twice. The first year I didn't get it, but when I reapplied, I got it, was that, these guest speakers, most of them came virtually because the government's like, I'm not playing for plane tickets, right? They're not about to be paying for me to fly people and have them in hotels, which is fair, right? That would be expensive and exorbitant. So when I said it would be mostly virtual, I think they're like, oh, okay, pay people
Right.
for their labor, but not paying people, for a hotel stay or airfare, which might get to be like, okay, is that really necessary? Right. And so again, when we submit receipts, because they don't just give you the money, more often it's reimbursed. Basically, you run the program, they pay you back for it. I can't submit a receipt for a hotel or airfare because that's not what it's for. It's for paying people for their time to lecture to my students, paying students for their time to work and internships. I think I get paid a small amount extra to do extra work because this is not, within my normal right purview of work. Maybe a little bit of other money here or there. We're gonna have like an end event or something. It was like 2000. It wasn't even a lot for the end event to, again, have like a culminating event. So again, the money is earmarked for specific things. This isn't like they're like, oh yeah, here's just this money. I think people have this perception that all this taxpayer money is just getting dumped into these colleges just because. No, that is far, far, far from the case.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that, especially when you add to that historically Black colleges and universities, but specifically land grant funded institutions that were given not just to HBCUs, but first by the Merrill Act to, public schools to support really working class students to get to college. And the whole point was to focus on agriculture and industry and military tactic work. But then it comes about after, I believe in 1890, of course, that you get HBCUs as a part of it. And so we're already sorely underfunded, meaning the goal was that there was to be a match, that whatever the federal government gave, the state government would match it. And for years and years and years and years, that has not happened. And so a lot of times the grants that people do win, when they win them, are if you're at -10, they're helping us to at least get a -5, right? And helping students who are in these spaces to at least get to -5. And I think that understanding that that's where the grant money really comes in is important, but also that for schools like many of those that I align with, we weren't getting a lot of that money we were supposed to be getting in the first place. So then to add to it or to take away from what already wasn't there is going to really heavily impact what these schools were designed to do in particular. But I think it's really important to lean into what was actually happening, to your point, on the ground with grant funding and what it is doing. So that leads me into thinking more about public scholarship and the most recent things that have happened, which is around the Library of Congress. And, the firing of various people, I'm sure those people saw it coming. I don't think that this was any big surprise, right, necessarily to them. And of course, people are challenging it, but we're being hit with so many different things. I think that it's becoming harder and harder to find the hole to challenge. So you just end up not challenging anything. So, what are your thoughts?
Right. I mean, I think it's such a difficult time because I think again, even having it's overwhelming, but also even understanding how all of these pieces connect together. So thinking about, okay, the NEH has been, basically defunded, except for, of course, to make Trump's like statue
Culture
garden.
garden, yeah.
Honestly, too, I'll just get aside into that a little bit. I saw an email from the NEH because I still get their emails that they're having a grant for someone to make the statues. That's not how that works. You don't get a grant to make a statue from the NEH. And I'm like, this is so funny because they probably have to still use that language because basically the only way the NEH can even give money is through a grant. The NEH can't just spend $200,000 on something, right? This is again an agency that's funded by Congress and everything they do is sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
Congress appropriates. So that's why they need to use the language of a grant,
Mm-hmm.
even though again, essentially like if the government wanted to hire someone to build a building, that's like a request for proposals that they would send out to contractors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But an agency like the NEH, they have no business doing something like requesting an artist to make statues because that's not what they do, right? They
Right.
fund nonprofits and schools to make programs for pretty much students, or they fund researchers to make new knowledge that's both basically like books or something online.
Mm-hmm.
A statue garden really doesn't fit into any of that. So I thought that again was really interesting. And I'm like, why are they calling a grant? Oh, because they're trying to again
Get
find a
around.
loophole to use this money for what they want, even though it's really not. That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But so you have the NEH being defunded, you've got the Library of Congress, right? And again, this is an important repository of so much of our history and stories, and who they put at the head of that can again, impact what documents get kept, what we see changing and shifting, their website, all those kinds of things. Again, shrinking access. I think about the NEA. So the NEH and the NEA are almost, I feel like almost like sibling institutions, right? The arts and humanities. And the arts, I think they fund a lot of publishing companies, independent ones. Like I'm a board member for the Feminist Press, and they've unfortunately, lost a grant. A lot of these, smaller independent presses need funding from the NEA. And honestly, in terms of scale of money, it might not seem like, well, to the average American, it might seem like a lot, but then to someone who, knows or hears about deals that are millions of dollars,
Right.
20,000 might not seem like a lot.
Yeah.
But even 20,000 for a small independent press, that's a lot of money, right? Like they're a shoestring situation, right? And so again, just cutting our access to diverse stories, what can be made, again, it's sort of limiting all of those things and thinking about a time when we're in an era where there's so much misinformation and there's so little access, and you increasingly, right, like need money for access. I was just thinking about like how many news media subscriptions will I pay for, right? Will I pay for the New York Times and LA Review of Books and LA Times and well, not the Washington Post anymore, not ever with the Washington Post, but like I'm a fan of the New Yorker. Like, I mean, how many, like, and I'm luckily in a position at this point in my life to pay for some of them or to have them paid for professionally, but many people are not, right? And so I think even that, thinking about, okay, if you're not going to be able to pay for it and you're not going to be able to get it through your library, because again, I think it's the IMLS, right? Grant funds libraries. Of course, that then boils down more to state funding. I think a lot of libraries are funded through their state. But again, if you're maybe in a Republican controlled state, your library might really be in danger. I don't know. You got to check what's going on. So you're not going to get through your schools. You're not gonna be able, the schools can't get grant funding from the NEH. Your libraries aren't getting funding. The Library of Congress maybe is not gonna have it. So how are you gonna get this
Yeah.
information, right?
Yeah.
How are we going to get some of these stories, some of this news, right? Some of these things, museums, right? If museums now can't have funding, or they're going to shutter, or they're going to struggle, how will people have access to these things?
Yeah, I think that I don't know that we fully understand right now the very strong impact that this will have, not necessarily on us, but the multiple generations to come that this will impact in terms of access. My son is learning about the American Revolution and he's just so excited about all things America, which is wonderful. But I felt compelled when I knew we were going to DC this past weekend to make sure that we visited the monuments, and then we had a nice full day and we went to the AFAM, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I gave, basically a 6-year-old a version of what was happening, right? And if you've been to the museum, you know it's huge and there's so much information. But because he's 6 and he's into war, we could talk about Toussaint Louverture, and we could talk about, right, that really great sort of Revolutionary War area that they have in the museum, and we could talk about the Civil War, right? And it was exciting and kind of go through those things. But it made me think about how I felt like, no, I have to take him to this because I felt like, oh, I have a few years before I think he's really ready to have these conversations. But then I thought, no, I may not have a few years. And while he's here, and even my 3-year-old, who she wasn't going to understand, but at least we're going to take pictures besides certain exhibits, right? So at least they were there and you were there at some point, right, to hear about it. And because what I see really is the decimation that if these places want to stay open and want to continue with federal grant funding, they're going to have to be a shell of themselves and of all of the work that people have done to create this very complicated, nuanced story that we have grown accustomed to being able to have. Because to your point, you can't fund everything, you can't subscribe to everything. I saw this conversation on Substack about like how many paid writers can you get? I mean, at some point, you're getting so many emails in your inbox, and it's too much. It's information overload, even as you try to support people and the work that they're doing. So, yeah, it feels like there are generations worth of decimation of information that we've come to take for granted as just being accessible. And at first I thought, okay, is this part of us also having been in the academy for so long? And so there's some, but no, I think in general, it has become sort of common that there is accessibility to a variety of voices and information. And we're certainly rolling back the tide on the types of voices that we hear. And even for your major publishing houses, no, they don't rely on grants, but certainly they rely on if Barnes and Noble can and will carry the books that they publish. So if you're publishing something, and shout out to Barnes and Noble, because I think I've been in there a few times recently, and they've done a really good job of highlighting voices that I thought maybe they would kind of roll back on that they haven't. But if you don't, if the publishing, if this company says, yeah, we can't really promote that book because of X, Y, and Z that is happening, right? I.e. Target, i.e. whoever else, what does that look like for the publishing house? Well, you're going to publish the books that will make you money. And so anyway, I think to your point about all of that, we're in a very interesting and scary place as it pertains to information. And my thought process has been if there's anywhere to invest, you should be investing in the literature that you can hold in your hand physically hold in your hand and have your own personal library. I just wrote on Substack, like, you are your family's historian. You are the person that
Right.
is the knowledge holder. Can't wait on somebody else to give it to you. Can't wait. And you can't even trust the platforms that they'll push the information to you, you know. I heard someone talk about how, like, you really aren't seeing, or they weren't seeing, I haven't been seeing a lot either, of sort of pro-Palestinian conversation or any sort of, you don't see it at all, or at least I haven't. And at one point, you were seeing it a lot. Maybe you'll get a story here and there, but again, the platforms control what we see and what we don't. And I
Right.
think just being mindful of that.
Right. The censorship and the the control. And I will say, even to your point about, again, things that you can hold. In the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of, I've noticed particularly, right, like a lot of smaller literary magazines and news media sites like closing or shuttering. And I'll say a moment of silence for a Yes magazine that I published with that's been around for 30 years, and unfortunately they are shuttering. And so again, thinking about the fact that, like, I'm like, oh yeah, like some of these things that you've written online, now that, if that place doesn't survive, now it's sort of gone, right? And so we used to think, oh, things in print are sort of like ephemeral, temporary. No, things online as well. That
Yeah.
they told us so much when we were growing up, the internet is forever. Not necessarily, not if you can't pay for it.
Because everything is behind a paywall. I mean, and I get it. It makes sense, right? We all have to, make our money and all those things. But the paywall has created such a divide, even between, to me, part of why we have such a large group of people that have maybe aren't processing the same way in terms of, kind of critical conversation, nuanced conversation, is because all of that conversation moved behind a paywall,
Well,
and
yeah,
what's been left are your major news. Let's just say if someone's watching TV, your two major news stations that are basically on whatever side of the spectrum they're on. And you're not getting a complex history because they don't have time for that, right?
right,
And you're not getting all of the information because the whole point is to get you to clickbait and tune in and get worked up about whatever side of things they're on. And so to me, part of what we're seeing now is just a result of a lot of that public intellectualism being hidden away, being put away, and saying, no, you'll have to pay in order to have access to it. Well, that's fine. But not only did you hide it away behind a paywall, you put so many layers between people even knowing it existed, right? When you think
right,
about journals, you don't know journals exist unless you're a part of the academy. Okay, you know the main journals that exist and the conferences. I think that's partially been the problem, and I don't know what that looks like moving forward. You can't give everything for free. I understand that, but are there some
right,
things that we can say, no, this should be common knowledge? Like, this should just
right.
be, I need to share.
I think too, again, in this era where of hypercapitalism, right, the things that are being lost because everything is behind a paywall, and what is being gained for those who want to, right, like have a much more controllable, less critical thinking citizenry that's not going to push back, right? Even thinking about, right, the kind of culture, even the importance of a literary culture, right? I mean, it's just, I think about, France is known for a good protest, right? France is known, like, they don't play about the protest, French Revolution history, and a number of other factors. But I also just think about the culture of, in other countries, having like these small independent bookstores everywhere.
Yeah.
Used bookstores, independent bookstores, people selling books, this kind of culture of literariness that, I mean, it's kind of increasing a little bit here, but still like kind of
But
pretty dead.
it's very niche though. I mean, I think
That too. It's
because,
also very niche.
yeah, because I see it, right? But I see it because I found the places to say, oh, here are my people. And there are a lot of people. But if you're not knowing that that's there, I don't know that you are tapped into it, right? In the same ways, especially because it depends on genre. It depends on what you're interested in, the types of books you're interested in. Will depend on what because my side of Book Talk, I remember I had said on TikTok, like, oh, I want to join Book Talk. And they were like, it's a little spicy over here, but you can join. And again, but my version of books is one thing. And that, it can get to many
Right.
different things. The beauty of,
Right.
yeah,
Right. And so, I think that's the other thing too, right? The growing side of the entertainment book entertainment industry here is mostly spicy, romance,
yeah,
fantasy. I think there's still much more of a kind of intellectual,
yeah.
critical thinking public intellectual. I can't remember. Maybe it was in Buenos Aires. I saw a picture. I've never been, but I want to go of a bunch of different like independent bookstores, and I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of like Paris with all the different independent bookstores, or like just small kind of mom, or just even like book stands on the
Hmm.
street that
Hmm.
sell books. Right? Like, and so again, thinking about the necessity for that culture to have a population that's just thinking critically, engaged, thinking about things, and again, I wonder too if again the high cost of living, the kind of grind here has really kind of like stamped, or has always kind of stamped something of that out over here,
Yeah,
whereas that
yeah,
still not, those places are not quite as hyper capitalistic as we are yet. I might be coming with, kind of Americanization and Westernization, but they're not at that place. And so there still is this ability to kind of have more of, and then again, everyone should read the kind of books they want to read, enjoy what they want to enjoy,
yeah,
but at the same time, it's like, what are we at kind of like a societal level, right? Like missing out on, sacrificing, and not having more of kind of like an intellectualism, right? For everyday people, right? That is
yeah,
sort of brewing in, critical thinking, questioning, wanting to read, wanting to challenge yourself. I think
yeah,
we see Americans moving more and more to this place of like not wanting to think hard or think through challenges. And it's maybe because life is really hard here. And I
mhm.
mean, I can't blame you, but at the same time, it's like that puts us in a difficult place, right? Because life keeps getting harder, perhaps because we don't do the hard thinking we need to do.
Yeah, I think to your point about the hard thing, I think we don't want to do it. I will say that's what makes me really happy about the excitement around Sinners, right? Or even the
Yes.
excitement around Mar Kills Forever. And I know the excitement has been, oh, it's like puppy love, but to me, I've been also seeing them sort of chart out all of the various excellent shows that Mara Akil has given us over the years and like put them in conversation. So to me, that felt like pushing the conversation further, and even conversations around class that came up in that show, like all the things, which I haven't watched the whole thing, but we can talk about that when we get to it in the next part if I haven't watched the whole thing. But Sinners, I want to talk about because it feels like people really have gotten excited around and galvanized around this movie, and it is a movie that invites you, I think, to have a more complex conversation. I told you on the phone that the vampires actually having some kind of agential thought or like having autonomy, especially when they stopped trying to pretend they weren't vampires and were like, come on, like, did you think you could survive this? Did you think you could survive this America, right? The whole thing. It requires a little bit more of in-depth conversation, the sort of play with Irish folk. All of that requires really and it felt like people really want to think. So what are your thoughts on Sinners and what feels like a really great response to it? Even the director getting people to say, oh, I need to go watch this at an IMAX theater, right? Which, like, those are things I wouldn't have thought of. But I was like, oh, I'm in New York. Let me make sure I find this theater that I'm supposed to watch this film on to get the best experience.
Did you see in the IMAX 70 millimeter specifically?
Yeah.
Okay, I recently saw in 70 well, that's a whole another story. But did you feel like it felt like specifically like the 70 millimeter felt like different, or like the color looked different or
Well,
something?
I haven't seen it in the regular, so I don't
Okay.
know. Yes, I don't know but it felt cinematic,
Mhm.
beautiful. I think people were saying it's another film that they were saying you have to watch, like that Up, Get Out, Next. I don't know. One of those that had like a one
Mhm.
name that threw something out at you. But yeah, I need to see it in the regular version too to see if
Yeah, to
there was a
compare it.
difference. Yeah.
So I've seen this movie a lot of times. It's funny, right? Because I will say my partner and I, the first time we went to see it, we saw part of it late, and so I feel like that also tempered some of my feelings about it, but I love the response and the critical response people have had to it. I think there are a lot of really interesting pieces to pull out, and that is really great. I have some critiques, I think, about like the story's cohesiveness. I feel like I wanted more of like a feeling like a full circle, or like this is the thesis. Not every movie or everything has to be like that, but I felt like there were a lot of things that I feel like just didn't tie together as much as I wanted them to. I also love that I pointed out that I was like, "Oh, girl, that first hour was slow," and you're like, "But isn't that like the South?" And I'm like, "Maybe you're right." I was like, "Lord, we spent an hour getting everybody together to open the juke joint. We done found, grace, and we done got the this and the that, and like, are we gonna
Get to it.
can we get to like whatever's supposed to happen? My God." So, but I
And
think I
and
was
like I
also
said, it felt like a southern day, like, or especially a southern day in a rural community, 2-lane highway, right? Like you're gonna get there when you
New
get
lane highway,
there,
absolutely.
you know? Yeah.
So, okay, I want to ask you because this is something I'm so fascinated by, and this is probably a controversial, a controversial thought here, but I'm very interested in the way that people. Very happy about. I cannot say her name, but Annie's representation as a bigger, dark-skinned
Mhm.
woman as a love interest. I love that for her. I love that for us. However, I think people are like, oh, this love story. Like, I want me a smoking Annie. But when I zoom out and look at it, to me, I feel like this man was gone 7 years. He pop up at her house. He like, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you fry that fish for the juke joint I'm opening tonight? He hits it real quick. They kind of like, oh yeah, we missed each other, and then essentially, she get caught up with the vampires. Spoilers if you haven't seen it. Exile.
Right.
She gets killed. I mean, they're going to be together, I guess, in the end, wherever they're going to be as a family. But I mean, zooming out, you've been gone 7 years, and you pop up asking for a favor. That's giving my ideal love story to me. I don't know. What do you think?
Asking for a favor, and remember their baby has passed, and he even questions her was still doing what he called. I don't know what he calls it, but like basically the old magic kind of thing, right? The hoodoo,
The hoodoo.
whatever. And it's like, well, why didn't it work for our
Right.
baby and that kind of thing. Yeah. Do we romanticize the toxicity a little bit? Okay.
I don't know that people are ready to admit that the community love us some Michael B. Jordan, and certainly he's a fine man, and love us a good black movie, and so him and his brother, more smoke because he's at least more, I guess, level headed than Stack, are just going to be the heroes of the movie. But in some, like I told you before, when I think about it, y'all been gone 7 years, roll up, decide to buy a building from the Klan,
Right.
threaten them, and basically get everybody you knew killed. Like that's not like when you look at it from that angle, that's not great. Y'all ain't been here in 7 damn years. Pop up out of nowhere after having messed around with the mobs and got them angry at each other in the north. Pop up, start some shit down here, get everyone turned into vampires, and then or we're gonna have them killed by the Klan. Like, what
But
was
doesn't that feel like a reflection a little bit of, I feel like how, what I've heard, how some black folks in the South sort of responded to civil rights organizing, to Black Panther organizing that specifically came down South, that there was a little bit of, you're going to get everything riled up here and we're going to be left with the aftermath.
the backlash?
Maybe they couldn't kill you because the televisions were, I mean, the major news productions were here to cover that, but the major news productions are going to leave, and who's left is the black people that were already here, that are going to continue to be here, and what does that look like afterwards, right? Which I think about a lot, and it feels like that to me very much. Your cousins who you love, but they forgot how the South is. They got a little confused about, came in guns blazing, right?
They did.
And this is where the vampires also are saying, and I think his brother actually says too, which also shout out to Michael B. Jordan, because the way he played those characters so well, I forgot that it was just him playing these two characters. Like, I believe the personalities. He was so good in this film. But I think where he's like, there's no way you thought we were gonna come down and have this juke joint and buy it from him. And when he said, when the main vampire is like, yeah, they're a
From the
part of the clan, that's their uncle or
Grand Duke
whatever,
Wizard.
and that they were going to come and kill you anyway, right? And all these things. I think it just felt very, like, to your point about just how, but I think it addressed it, right? And saying, how realistic are you about what you think this can be? How realistic are you? And I think even who was it that said, listen, clearly y'all put the two mobs against each other, right? And that's why you're here. And it's not just because you wanted to come back, right? This was a
Right.
whole, you
Mary
had
said
to.
that.
Yeah, you had to come back because you couldn't stay there, right? So that was very interesting to me. I think this kind of like play with the afterlife was very interesting, with Annie saying, no, make sure you stab me in the chest because I don't want to be trapped, right, in this body. With you seeing them, I guess, in kind of an afterlife way with their baby, with you seeing the brother and what's her name again? Mary, right? Showing up, they haven't aged at all, right? In let's say the 80s or whenever it should have been the 90s, right? That was also very interesting to me, the kind of play on afterlife. And I thought it was particularly interesting because when we talk about afterlife, especially in Black tradition, most of the time it's around Christianity, even the end when, Church Boy comes back, that to me felt like, in the color purple, where she comes back and she's singing and she comes back home. And the reconciliation is you go back to God, right? And he chooses to keep his guitar, broken as it
Mhm.
may be, and continue on. And so that was also very interesting to me that the narrative wasn't as simple as that. And not that that's simple, but as the sort of normative way that we see these kind of reconciliation
Mhm.
narratives, especially when you're playing around with vampires, let's say demonic spirits, who do whatever you want to call it, right? Or you're playing around with alternative spiritualities to Christianity, what it looks like versus what sinners gave us. Like I thought they did an excellent job with blending these kind of complex stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting again thinking about because I didn't know, and I guess this was one of my main points of beef about it, but I think I saw somewhere and having taken a lot of posts and media about Sinners since watching it several times that that area of the Mississippi, the Delta, right, is a place where
Mm-hmm.
those blues singers are like known for singing so good, right? They say they sold their soul to the devil. So I was like, okay, like it's connecting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized in the very, very beginning, you get Annie kind of saying some of that lore and then talking
Mm-hmm.
about the danger of like, it almost looks like it's a chalk scene, but I don't know what that little cartoon thing is at the beginning where Annie's kind of telling you that and
Calling,
about how
calling
they can
for.
like how yeah, basically how they can kind of call forth evil. They can do great good for their community, but they can
Mm-hmm.
also call forth evil. And so I was kind of like, okay, this is setting the stage. But I guess I really feel like one is the very first thing, and it's so easy to miss it being that very first moment, and then
Yeah.
you go to like I think maybe Church Boy or something, whatever. Like, so I feel like I wanted more repetition of that to help remind you of
Okay.
that
Throughout the
because
story. Yeah. Because I
I
actually
feel like
forgot about that till you just said it. I'm like, oh,
girl,
right.
it's only because I've seen this movie so many times. Only because I've seen it so many times, I'm like, okay, this is where they're
Right.
really setting the scene for that. But the problem is like basically you see that, then you get to him, right, coming in the car, coming back to the end at the beginning with him coming to the church with his father, and you get the flashes of Remnick. And then after that, the next like hour is solidly them putting together a juke joint. So you're like, whoa, right? Like
Yeah.
it feels like that narrative about the evil, about vampires or whatever. And it even tells you about like the Choctaw Irish, like bringing all this mythology together.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of get that in the beginning, and then you don't get that for like another solid 45 minutes or an hour. And I feel like it almost feels disorienting when you get back to it because it's been so long. It didn't feel to me like it was, I guess, interwoven enough
Yeah.
to reinforce. But I do think too, again, understanding that is like the idea. It all makes more sense in terms of him still deciding like I'm gonna not go home to my or like in a way like turn away from the church, rebuke that, head towards kind of this life of sin, singing, whatever. It kind of again makes more sense. Because the first time I watched it, I spent so much time being like, why Sammy? Like, why even him? Why any of this? Like, this is
Mm-hmm.
so random. I'd seen the scene where his father basically said, oh, one day you're going to attract the devil. But I mean, I feel like that sounds like something anybody's preacher dad would say. Having watched that first scene better, I'm like, okay, it's kind of getting, and then even that, okay, they're known for like this idea of having soldier sold to the devil. And I'll say one more thing that my mom pointed out. She watched it for the first time. I took her to see the 70 millimeter in New York City this past week. It was actually so loud I couldn't watch it, so I did not watch it my fourth time, or I watched bits of, but not all of it. I went to the bookstore, but she watched it and she said that scene, right? That kind of infamous scene where you see, he's singing and it's bringing in all of these different people from various musical genres across space and time. My mom was saying it was making her think about like, what have contemporary artists done to sell their soul for? And I was like, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. Especially, I mean, thinking about Diddy being on trial, R. Kelly, like all of these kind of like famous hip hop artists who done some real questionable stuff on the
Right.
side or whatever. I was like, I hadn't even thought about thinking about it that way. Like, is that a larger part of
Being
kind
spoken
of
to
like,
as well. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so really quick, so the guy who plays Sammy, his name is Miles Caton, and he's kind of his family is well known musically in the gospel community, right? So I saw him perform years ago for a Thai tribute like Christmas concert, and I'm like, who is this kid? His voice is like if I can find it, I'll send it to you. He can really, really sing, and his mom is well known for singing, and his dad is very musical as well. So I didn't recognize him because he was like a little kid. I remember seeing, and then he's been singing background, like he sung background for her at one point, and just going around with different people. And so I found it when I realized it was him. I found it so very important and authentic to the film that they would choose him with his very strong roots in gospel. Although, like I said, he's been singing background for a lot of different people, not just in gospel,
Mhm.
for some years now as an adult, that they would choose him for the role and choose his voice to sort of be that call for the role. Because I think there's a way that the clarity, the depth of his voice is so important for the role to see it mature once he becomes the older man. But I think it's really to have him play that role to me, especially because I think he held back a little bit in terms of his
Mm.
voice, just added to because I was like, why do I really resonate with him? Because he's playing a role that he knows.
Mm.
Because you can't gospel, you have to feel, similar. And this is where gospel and the blues feel so similar, right? Which is also, I think, a part of the story because there's a feeling to it. Gospel isn't just about your voice, it's that, but you got to feel it. Everybody can't sing gospel, right? In the same way everybody can't sing the blues, which they talk about as well. So I think having that blend there, I really, really appreciated that specific touch of having someone that has a deep God has deep gospel roots and really
Mm.
does sing. I think, and not a superstar singing, but sings.
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, the music is so powerful in the movie. That's the thing I'll say too, is like my mom was like, she's like, I feel like I have to see it again. She was like, I don't know what I was supposed to get, but I feel like I'm supposed to see it again.
Yeah.
And I mean, also there has been a lot of hype about the movie too. And so I'll ask, do you feel like it lived up to the hype for you?
It actually did, and I was surprised it did because normally when movies have this much hype around them, I don't go see them right away
Mm.
because I want to give it time to marinate and let people get their opinions out. But it did because it was very unexpected for me. There was not a moment, especially with the vampire part, that nothing about that fit into what I expected to happen.
Mm.
And I hadn't watched anyone's, hot take on it or their analysis of it. I just heard you got to see it, you got to see it. And I was like, oh, and I actually told Jerome I want to go see it with him this weekend. I was like, to me, it was better than Get Out, which, is kind of been our barometer for, great film, critical thought process. To me, I liked it a little bit better only because the horror of it did not feel as expected as what I thought it was going to be, which is white people vampires, right? And that's kind of going to be there was the layers, the historical layers to it for me felt good. Did it live up to the hype for you?
It wasn't what I expected, but maybe not in a good way, but I still really appreciate it. Like I think it's very interesting. Again, I love all the critical takes. I love the conversation. I don't think I enjoyed it. I think that's the only thing is I feel like I didn't necessarily enjoy it the way I enjoyed Get Out. Like I feel like
Mm,
Get Out was funny. Like I said, I've like watched Get Out so many times, writing an article on it. I feel like the script to me felt so like everything a character says relates back to what's going to happen, and I kind of really am like, oh, that's kind of brilliant. And so watching Sinner so many times, I'm like, some of this feels like I don't know. Some of it I'm like, I don't know if you really needed every moment of this. Like
mm.
there are parts where I'm like that guy who they put him outside and it turns out he wasn't actually a vampire. They thought he was dead, so they put him outside
Right.
early
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the Corvette tears him apart. We did not need that scene. That man was completely unnecessary. Like, I don't know. There are just things that felt like, I don't know. I don't know if we really needed it.
Mhm.
Lines that felt like, whatever. But I feel like there are certain moments that felt like really amazing and spectacular. So I guess for me, again, it's about like as an overall, I felt like, but I think there are just so many individual pieces that really shine. Certainly the historical aspects, the music. I mean, I'm not as much of a music person too, so I feel like I probably can't appreciate as much as others, but certainly the musical aspect, I mean, the visuals. But I think for me, a little bit of the plot and the story and the dialogue, I think I was hoping for more or just to feel more from that first time, and I didn't get that. But
Okay.
it's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think to me, the level of conversation that's being had about it
That is great.
made me so happy to see because it felt like, okay, it isn't just a flash in the pan, let's say Kendrick Lamar's Super Bowl moment where we're excited to have these more in-depth conversations. We're continuing to have, and even to see like Ryan Coogler really stepping into his own. Is that how you say his name? Coogler?
Yeah,
Okay.
Ryan Coogler.
Stepping into his own, with, okay, of course, we were all excited about Black Panther, but you know that I like the second one much better than I like the first one, just because yeah, the complexity of the conversation was a lot better. And it just feels like it keeps getting better
Yeah.
with him and with the type of maybe risk that he's willing to take that I think is really great. So I feel it feels really nice to have that on one hand, to have the fun love story with Forever on the other hand, and kind of a little bit more
Hmm.
lighthearted, right? To have these two things sort of sitting, I'm sure Issa Rae's gonna come out with something, I can feel it in my bones. Something's happening. Well, we didn't really love that movie. The one on Netflix. I keep forgetting about that one. But that was just production. She
One of them
produced it.
days.
One of them days. Yeah, it was
Did you watch it in the end?
I tried. I may
Okay.
try again now that I thought about it, but it wasn't my favorite, but we'll try. It's a part of the story, I guess.
Yeah. I will say, me and my controversial takes. I was telling KJ, I was like, in terms of actual quality, one of them days actually worse than like Friday. And I mean, I'm sure he was like blasphemous, right? But like, I feel like
You said it was
Friday,
worse than Friday?
what?
You said it was worse than Friday?
He feels like it's much worse than Friday. And I'm like, in terms
Yeah.
of quality, it's kind of like a slapstick hood comedy. I'm like, could one of them days in 20 or 30 years be that nostalgic 2024 or whatever it is, 2025 movie for people, for young black people or whatever? Could it be that for black girls especially, right? Could it
And
be that?
I 100. No, it's nostalgic, and that's why we love it. And to your point, this probably will be one of those later on. People look back and like it was a movie that was on, right? Kind of like whatever movies that were on in the background of your life that now you love. Like Jerome has this whole list of movies that I'm like, these movies are terrible. The acting is
Right.
terrible, but he grew up watching them, and like
Right. It's just
and it just
nostalgia
become
aspect.
it's the nostalgia aspect, and so I agree with that. Um,
Yeah, KJ was not feeling my like, oh yeah, this is like he was not feeling my compare. He was like, this is unbelievable that you would compare these and such, and like was kind of offended. And I'm just like, look, like I guess I think too, right? Again, and I think he's like, you're sexist, right? Because I'm always like, male comedians don't make me laugh that much, frankly. I don't know,
right.
comedy's gendered. Like sometimes some of the stuff that like it doesn't make me laugh. And similarly, it's so funny we watched Friday because after I was saying that, I was like, all right, like let's go ahead and watch Friday. I felt bored. Honestly, it's crazy. I think because I did not grow up watching Friday. So
Right.
I was like, I actually thought I'd watch Friday. Turns out I had watched Boys in the Hood and got them
Real.
black card. It's fine. It's fine. Go ahead. I didn't grow up watching either. I have seen Boys in the Hood though. I mean, movie in the late '90s, early 2000s with Ice Cube. I don't know.
The thoughts on sinners. I thought that was a really good conversation and just provides some multiple perspective because I feel like I've seen the same person now that I've started to watch people talk about it. I haven't seen too many critiques of it or even just like questioning certain moments or saying like, oh, what about this? What about that? So I'm glad that we got to have that conversation. But I think that's pretty much it. Is there anything that you want to say to end off, or what are your thoughts?
I want to say, getting back to where we started, write to your Congress people, do what you can with the whatever resources you have to get pushback on all the things that are happening. It is overwhelming, but this is right important. So I'll just sort of again end on that reminder note. There's certainly organizations, the MLA, the AHA, American Historical Association, I think the ACLS, like American Society of Learn something like that. It's ACLS and some
Yeah, they were
organization.
out there in DC doing a lot of great work.
Yeah, they are all, putting a lawsuit to try to get back NEH funds. So again, if there are organizations that are, putting up these lawsuits. If you can support them in some way, even sharing about the lawsuit, or if you can donate or whatever they're asking you to do, just take that into consideration. If you too value education and humanities and those things, just put that
Yeah.
reminder out there.
Yeah, I second that motion. I also want to say if you have any or understanding of any grassroots organizations right now, your smaller nonprofits that are local to you or
Mhm.
in the area, they are definitely in need of
Right.
support, help, amplification, and whatever ways that feel comfortable, safe, don't stretch you outside of your capacity, but they are definitely in need of it. And it would be great if we could all find ways to amplify those smaller organizations that are trying really hard in a landscape where they're having to pivot very quickly. Many
Right.
of them don't want to, and for good reason, but we're in a moment where there's kind of also a lot of no choice in that too. So anyway, second that. Thank you all so much, and we will see you on another video. Bye.